So the title of the text I'm calling today is Land on Your Feet. Land on your feet. Life is full, at least in my life, life is full of twists and turns, and sometimes there seems to be a tendency to fall flat on your face. I don't think I'm the only one that's fallen flat on your face when you're just trying to live life. In fact, I would suggest to you that many times we fall flat on our face. And the temptation for some of us, depending on how you're wired, is to stay on your face when you fall flat on your face. I read a story some time ago. In fact, I've read it several times. His family moved in 1831 and he lost his job. In 1832, he ran for the state legislature and he lost. In 1833, he and a friend borrowed money to start a store, and his friend died, and the store lost money and went out of business. In 1834, he was elected to the state legislature. In 1836 and 1838, he was re-elected. In 1840 and 1842, he did well. In 1843, he was defeated. In 1846, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. In 1848, he failed in his effort for re-election in the House. In 1849, he attempted to hold another role that he didn't quite make it. Longer story short, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. Now, I wonder how many of us would choose to continue to keep trying when you fall flat on your face over and over again. Sometimes it can be very, very discouraging when you keep falling flat on your face. Turn over to Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament. And the Living Bible is a paraphrase that I want to share from this text. Starting in verse number 1 in Jeremiah chapter 29. And it says, after, and again, some of these names are not, from the United States, so they're kind of hard to pronounce. But again, Jeremiah 29. After Jeconiah, the king, and queen mother, the court officials, and the tribal officers and craftsmen had been deported to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, Jeremiah wrote them a letter from Jerusalem, addressing it to the Jewish elders, priests, and prophets, and to all the people. He sent the letter with this particular individual and another particular individual. Again, the names are really hard to pronounce. I'm not going to sound silly trying to pronounce them all. When they went to Babylon, King Zedekiah's ambassadors to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. He reigned over a large swath of land over that time. And here's what the letter said in verse number 4 in Jeremiah chapter 29. The Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, sends his message to all the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. He says, build homes and plan to stay. That's not the word I would want to hear. If I was exiled, if I was taken captive, I don't want to stay. I want to get out of there, right? But here it's saying, build homes and plan to stay. Plant vineyards, for you will be there many years. Again, not the words I want to hear. Marry and have children, and then find mates for them and have many grandchildren. Multiply, this paraphrase says. Don't dwindle away. Verse 7. And work for the peace and prosperity of Babylon. Now think about that a minute. They're taken captive, and this paraphrase is recommending that they do well by the people who have taken them captive. That's a total mind shift for me. It's stretching my brain considerably, but that's another sermon. Pray for her, for if Babylon has peace, so will you. Verse 8. The Lord God Almighty, the God of Israel, says, don't let the false prophets and mediums who are among you fool you. Don't listen to the dreams that they invent, for they prophesy lies in my name. I have not sent them, says the Lord. The truth is this, you will be in Babylon for 70 years. Again, this is not something I want to hear if I was them, for sure. But then I will come and do for you all the good things I have promised and bring you home again. Verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for evil, to give you a future and hope. In those days, when you pray, I will listen. You will find me when you seek me, if you look for me in earnest. Verse 14. Yes, says the Lord, I will be found by you, and I will end your slavery and restore your fortunes. I will gather you out of the nations where I sent you and bring you back home again to your land. Now that is really hard to hear sometimes in verse number 11, that when this text says, this is God talking through Jeremiah, that I know I have good plans for you, but even though you're in the middle of a place, this is where a bad place, a difficult place, you can make it a good place because that's where I need you to be at this moment. And that's really hard to hear. That's really hard to read because none of us want to be in a very difficult place. All of us, I think, want to have good times, and we want to have a great life. We want to have peace and prosperity and everything going well. And it doesn't always happen that way. So the refocus and the readjustment sometimes of our expectations can determine how you land when life doesn't turn out the way you think it should turn out. I'll say it again. The refocus and the readjustment of your expectations can determine how you land when life doesn't turn out the way you think. In fact, some other folks have said, look at it as if the glass is half full and not half empty. There's a variety of ways how people say to look at things differently. I call it maybe a reframe, and that's, again, another text. William Bradshaw writes, Babe Ruth was known as the home run king, the Sultan of SWAT. In 1927, he hit a record-breaking 60 home runs in one season, a record that stood for 43 years, until the number of games played in a season was extended from 154 to 162. In 1961, Roger Maris hit 61 home runs. The single-season home run record now stands at 73 home runs in 154 games, still stands, and it sets before him, and this all happened before steroids were even part of the culture in sports, right? The author goes on to say, Ruth also held the lifetime home run record of 714 until Hank Aaron broke it in 1974. Babe Ruth has long been remembered as one of the greatest hitters in the history of Major League Baseball, but there's another record held by Ruth that many people are unaware of. He's also known as the King of Strikeouts. The King of Strikeouts. He held the lifetime strikeout record of 1,330 until it was broken in 1964 by another baseball great, Mickey Mantle. Babe Ruth was not afraid to strike out, an attitude, the author says, that contributed to his remarkable success. Much like Lincoln, the author says, Ruth knew that in order to win the big ones, like being elected President of the United States or setting home run records, you have to be willing to suffer some setbacks and defeats along the way. That's really hard for some of us. I can't speak for you, but for some of us, we don't want to fail in the process because failing is discouraging. Struggling is discouraging because you want to hit home runs every time you're up at bat. But when, as I shared in the last week or two, life is full of ratios. When you understand that life is full of ratios, then you know that falling on your face is part of the process of the journey. It's part of the process. It's part of how you get there. Okay? Over in Hebrews chapter 4, if you want to turn there, the New American Standard Bible puts it in a pretty plain and understandable way. Hebrews chapter 4, starting in verse number 14, says this, Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, I'm in Hebrews 4, verse 14, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. A paraphrase of that says, now that we know what we have, Jesus, this great high priest, with ready access to God, let's not let it slip through our fingers. We don't have a priest who is out of touch with our reality. He's been through weaknesses and testing and experienced it all but the sin. Let's walk right up to him and get what we so readily to give, take the mercy, and accept the help. So I would suggest to you that all the stuff that you and I are going through is not the first time that people around the world have gone through our stuff. And that's been a constant reminder for me that I'm not the only one who's gone through my particular set of struggles. Because oftentimes, again, for some of us, not all of us, the temptation comes occasionally when, poor me, I'm the only one struggling in this situation. No, in thousands of years, nobody has gone through exactly the same thing that I've gone through. Well, reality is that's probably a bunch of hooey. Because we're not the only one. I'm not the only one going through the stuff that I'm going through. You're not the only one going through the stuff that you're going through. So if other people have gone through it, then certainly you are going to get through it also. In my life, that you know what, that then gives me hope. That gives me hope that if other people have overcome the stuff that they've overcome, then maybe there's some hope for me to do some things that I need to do and overcome the discouragement of the journey when I fall on my face more times than I care to. There seems to be a consistent pattern of those who've been able to push through the worst of the worst struggles in their life and have made it. There's a term in the military called adapt, improvise, and overcome. Dale Wilson writes, the United States Marine Corps calls it improvise, adapt, and overcome. The Marine Corps has been successfully employing this concept mostly because of the creativity of its people and their success-based attitude. During the chaos of battle and the implementation of plans according to the commander's intent, remember that word, commander's intent, or words, they must find what works or people die. Equipment is lost and the battle is lost. For the Marine Corps, the whole notion of improvise and adapt and overcome becomes second nature. Now I suggest by the end of my text here today, I hope that you're going to try to implement into your life some tools, some ideas, some recommendations that may help you get through some of the struggles that you're going through. He goes on to say, in the military they call it the commander's intent. The stated description of the end state as it relates to forces or entities and people, listen, the purpose of the operation and the key tasks to accomplish what they want done. So he goes on to say that a soldier's every move is predicated upon hours of forethought and planning. After the commander-in-chief approves the order of battle, listen, a soldier will find his personal orders specifying the scheme of maneuver in the field of fire. Each battalion is told what to do, what material to use, and how to set up the supply lines to do what they need to do. But there's only one problem, the author says. No plan survives contact with the enemy because the enemy always gets a vote. So there's two sides, in other words, right? There's the good side and there's the bad side. Consider the variables. A weather change, a key military asset is destroyed, etc. The beautiful thing, listen, about the commander's intent, that this is applicable to right now, to what's going on in your life and what's going on in my life, is that it means that your plans are never rendered obsolete by the unpredictable. I'll say that again. Your plans are never rendered obsolete by the unpredictable. You may lose the ability to execute the plan, but you never lose the responsibility of, listen, executing the commander's intent. Let me continue. Commander's intent manages to align the behavior of soldiers at all levels of the Army and Marines and other military forces without requiring, listen, without requiring detailed instructions from the high command. Listen to this. If you know the intention of the order, you are free to improvise to arrive at its fulfillment. If people know the intent, they can engineer their own solutions to accomplish the task. Let me put it down in my terms. When you have children and you suggest or you want the house to stay neat, you shouldn't need to list down every little detail that needs to be done, although in reality you know that sometimes needs to be done. But the commander's intent, the parent's intent is to do what? Is to keep the house clean, keep the house organized. So us little peons, us soldiers, us minions, right, Our role as children in our parents' house is to what? Is to do what the commanders or the parents want done. Turn over to Romans chapter 5. Yes, we're getting back to the Bible. Romans chapter 5 says this, starting in verse number 3. Romans chapter 5, starting in verse 3, it says, "We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they are good for us. They help us learn to endure, and endurance develops strength of character," this paraphrase says. Endurance helps develop strength of character. So many people, I know you've seen them, I know I've seen them, so many people become discouraged, big time discouraged, when the path to their destination is blocked or a detour is built. I know for me, if I'm on the highway and I want to get from A to B, if there's even a remote hint of a backup, or a remote hint of a detour, or a car accident, or something, the tendency for me is to get very frustrated, very angry, very irritated, and I will go the long way to bypass the detour and the traffic. In fact, it would sometimes takes me twice as long to get around the detour and around the backup because I want to keep moving. You see, I don't care if it takes me 2 and 3 times longer, but I'm moving. Right. Detours sometimes can be extremely frustrating. Life is about meandering and pushing through one disaster, because we all have disasters in our families, right, in some form, a roadblock, or disappointments that come one after another. Have you ever hit or faced disappointments that seem to hit you over and over again in the same month or the same year? When's it going to stop type of attitude? Most people don't know, or they forget that life is rarely in a straight line. There's an image, there's a graphic of 2 paths to the top. Most people think that the path to the top is straight up, right? Well, in reality, it's not. It's curved and it's all round and backwards and upwards and down. So it never is a straight line. So for those of us who sometimes are tempted to desire that straight line, that's not reality. Going to wherever you're attempting to go to is not reality if you think that you're going to get there on a straight line. So again, if you adapt, if you improvise and overcome, then that means, in my paraphrase, is you do more with less. I'll say it again. Adapting, improvising, and overcoming means that you do more with less. How many times haven't you had to stretch stuff? Maybe money in a particular month, or food in the refrigerator, or other things, maybe clothes that you need to replace, but you sew them instead of replace them, or you put a button on them instead of throwing it away. You understand? Sometimes you need to stretch it in order to make it work. Over in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, King Solomon, the great King Solomon, said, "As I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind." And that story is going to be extended. The difficulty happens when we assume life is going to be clear sailing all the time. Oh, I wish life was clear sailing all the time. Can you imagine if the day you were born until the day you die, that life is grand, life is wonderful, life is easy? I mean, if you just look at a book, you ingest the information. Or, if you go to the gym once, you're built for life, But it doesn't really happen that way, does it? So the Old Testament is graphic in the Bible, very, very graphic. It's full of information and stories that illustrate this adapting and improvising concept. Turn over to Judges chapter 15. Judges chapter 15, for me at least, shares a great story about doing exactly that, adapting and improvising and overcoming. Now, would I personally feel comfortable with doing some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff that's in the Old Testament? Not how I'm wired, but this stuff, it happened. And again, it's just an illustration how this can be applied. Judges chapter 15, starting in verse 1. "But after a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a young goat." Now, we're talking 3,000-4,000 years ago. We're not talking today, okay? Just so we're clear on timeline, okay? So Samson was a judge. visited his wife with a young goat, and said, I will go in to my wife in her room. But her father didn't let him enter. Verse 2, her father said, I really thought you have hated her intensely. So I gave her to your companion. Now, in that culture, in that context, the father had to say who their daughters married. Okay? So he assumed something about Samson. So daddy took daughter and gave daddy to somebody else. So obviously was not very happy with that story. So I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please let her be yours instead. Whoa, that would put me in a bad mood pretty quick. Verse 3. Samson then said to him, this time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. I'll get to that point in just a minute. Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches and turned the fox's tail to tail and put one torch in the middle between the two tails. Verse 5. When he had set fire to the torches, he released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, thus burning it up. So it destroyed everything. Verse 6. Then the Philistines said, who did this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he took his wife and gave her to his companion. So the Philistines came and burned her and her father with fire. This sounds like stuff that happened like on TV now, right? Which I'm not going to get into here. So it was serious stuff. I'll get to that again in just a few minutes. Verse 7. Samson said to them, since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you, but after that I will quit. He struck them ruthlessly with a great slaughter, and he went down and lived in the cleft of the rock of Etam. The story continues. Verse 9. Then the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and spread out in Lehi. Verse 10. The men of Judah said, why have you come against us? And they said, we have come up to you to bind Samson in order to do to him what he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us and that this is what you've done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. They said to him, we have come down to bind you so that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not kill me. So they said, okay, no problem. So we're skip on down to verse 14. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted as they met him. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds dropped from his hands. So here's where we get the improvising example here. Verse 15. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, so he reached out and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. Now, if it was me, I'd pick up some sort of a firearm. Of course, they didn't have firearms back then, but I'd pick up something a little stronger than the jawbone of a donkey. There we go, donkey again. Donkey. The kids tease me about how I say the word donkey. It's donkey, right, Christina? Donkey? No? Donkey? Okay, I may not edit that out. That's interesting. I was going so well until just the donkey story. But anyway. So then the whole point is that sometimes you and I are faced with situations where we have to improvise. Now, why would Samson choose to take the foxes and put fire and burn up the grain? Well, they worshiped this group of people. They had this god of fertility and crop, because in that culture they also, as we read earlier, is they had a habit of sacrificing their own children. In 2 Kings chapter 3 it says, then he took his oldest son who was to reign in his place and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. So again, they used methods that were anti-godly, if I could use those terms. So adapting and improvising and overcoming, again, doing more with less. This enables you and I to land on our feet when we choose to act and think outside the box. So many of us choose to act inside the box. In fact, we build our own box. We build our own bars around us, if you will, to keep us in and not really expand beyond what we can achieve. In 1941, In the midst of World War II, Winston Churchill visited the Harrow School, which had suffered during German air attacks. And in the middle of his short speech of 4 minutes and 12 seconds, he spoke 29 words that have turned out to be the most used quotations. Never give in, never give in, never, never, never. And nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. There are times when we miss opportunities to help others who are struggling in their lives, which helps them get on their feet. Acts chapter 3 says, starting in verse number 1, Peter and John went to the temple one afternoon, the Living Bible says, to take part in the 3 o'clock daily prayer meeting, this paraphrase says. As they approached the temple, they saw a man lame from birth, carried along the street and laid beside the temple gate, the one called the Beautiful Gate, as was his custom every day. Verse 3. As Peter and John were passing by, he asked them for some money. They looked at him intently, and Peter said, "Look here." The lame man looked at them, listen, eagerly expecting a gift. Eagerly expecting a gift. But Peter said, "We don't have any money for you, but I'll give you something else. I command you in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth to walk." Verse 7. Here's where the improvising comes into play. Then Peter took the lame man by the hand and pulled him to his feet. As he did, the man's feet and ankle bones were healed and strengthened so that he came up with a leap, stood there a moment, and began walking. Then, walking and leaping and praising God, he went into the temple with them. Again, I'll go back to verse 7. Then Peter took the lame man by the hand and pulled him to his feet. I would suggest, I'm not sure if I can prove it here today, but I would suggest that there are many times when we have to do more than just say the words.
Amen.
Sometimes we have to do more than just pray. Sometimes we have to do more than believe. We have to do other stuff to make stuff happen, to, if you will, improvise, to do things, to maybe force things to happen that if you didn't get out there and do an activity or a pattern of activities, then certain things wouldn't happen. I could go down the road on that, but I'll leave that alone. There are so many times, listen, when we can exceed the expectations of people all around us, but allowing ourselves to adapt in people's eyes. In other words, if you choose not to be flexible in how you get stuff done, you know, if I read a lot of the history books and a lot of the history stories, we see all the times how people, inventors and scientists and engineers and all these other smart people, they don't get there through one way. They figure out a way, they figure out a hole, they figure out an avenue, they figure out some sort of method or calculation to get stuff done. It's not always done the same way all the time, is the point I'm trying to get across. More than a century ago, 2 sportsmen were sailing along the coast of Scotland. They anchored their yacht in the harbor in the Inverness and went ashore to roam the beautiful countryside. Soon they became lost. Darkness was approaching and they couldn't find their way back to the harbor. They knocked at the door of a peasant cottage asking for a meal and lodging for the night, just for the night. The farmer viewed them with suspicion and sent them away. Knocking at the door of a neighboring farm, the owner welcomed the strangers into his house. He sat them at a table and laden with food. He gave them a bed and breakfast. Only in the morning did he discover that one of the 2 was the Prince of Wales, later to become King Edward V. Imagine the shame and disappointment of the first farmer who closed the door against his king. I would suggest to you that there are opportunities all around us to serve people that may not look like that they're worth our time, when in fact everybody's worth our time. There's a story Henry Ward Beecher shared it a long time ago. He said, the steel that has suffered the most is the best steel. The steel who has suffered the most is the best steel. It has been in the furnace again and again. It has been on the anvil. It has been tight in the jaws of the vice. It has felt the teeth of the rasp. It has been ground by emery. It has been heated and hammered and filed until it does not know itself, and it has come out a splendid knife. And if men only knew it, what are called their misfortunes are God's blessings. For they are the molding influences which give them shapeliness and edge and durability and power. I don't like it. I'll tell you flat out, I don't like the fire, I don't like the anvil, I don't like being squeezed, I don't like the pain, I don't like any of that stuff. In fact, I wish it didn't even exist. But if you and I look at our own lives as we've gone through that, although we hated going through it at the moment, guess what it did to us? If you're smart about it, it made you stronger. You have a choice to either have it make you stronger or make you bitter. It can either, again, make you stronger or it can make you bitter. And that's, again, another sermon. Emily Dickinson writes, "Not knowing when the dawn will come, I open every door." You know, when we expect good things to happen, or when we're trying to get good things to happen, you're going to potentially, out of maybe desperation, open up every door and window to get some light into what you're trying to accomplish, because you don't know what door, you don't know what window, you don't know what opportunity is going to be the one that's going to get you where you're trying to get to in life. Milton Berle wrote one time, in fact he said it several times, if opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. If opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. That has been, I think, one of the biggest reasons why certain things have been happening, is because being satisfied with the status quo doesn't open doors. Just like we read about John, and they were just going to the temple to pray, and they said, one text says, "Such as I have, I give to you." In other words, I don't have much more, but in the name of Jesus, rise up, and then he grabs the guy's hand. He doesn't just pray for him and leave him there. He does something after the prayer. He does something after his word. We can say a bunch of stuff all day long, but until we have actions that back up our words, then we really aren't doing a whole lot. There are times when what has worked in the past, listen, there are times that what has worked in the past is not meant to work now and in every situation. I'll say it again. There are times when what has worked in the past is not meant to work now in every situation. Meaning that I think many times you and I have to be flexible sometimes in how we get stuff done these days. Of course, that was also the same way 20 years ago, and 50 years ago, and 3,000 years ago, okay? Turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 17. This is another example of how somebody had to have the courage to say, you know what, that's not going to work for me. The paraphrase says this, 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 40, starting at 40. This is the story of David and Goliath, and the backstory is that Saul, the king at the time, saw that David, this young man, wanted to help take down this enemy that was threatening Saul's army. So Saul decided, look, you can't do this on your own. You're only a shepherd, in quotes. Let me put my armor on you. Now picture this. The backstory of this says that Saul was very tall. Remember? Saul was tall. There's no mention that David was tall. So can you imagine, just imagine Saul's tall armor with tailored armor, right? Comes right to here. But on David, I'm sure his sleeves were just dangling down. In other words, David says, this is not going to work for me. That's the backstory in just a few sentences. 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 40, one paraphrase says, then he picked up, this is David, then David picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his shepherd's bag, and armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, and then he started across to Goliath. David knew what worked for him.
That's right.
Saul's armor would not work for David. There was a time, and sometimes it still happens, that I wish that I was like, or have the characteristics of other people. These temptations come and go, I think, less than they used to when I was in my 20s. But I wish I had the armor, if you will, or the characteristics, or the personality style of other people. and then I ignored my 5 smooth stones that I had at my possession all the time. Again, verse 40. Then he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in the shepherd's bag, and armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling. And then he started across to Goliath. Verse 41. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt as this nice little red-cheeked boy, the paraphrase says. As Goliath approached, listen, as Goliath approached, David ran out to meet him, reaching into his shepherd's bag, took out a stone, hurled it from his sling, and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and the man fell on his face to the ground. So David conquered the Philistine giant with a sling and a stone. Think about how hilarious that may have seemed, or the story, or the possibility, I should say, may have seemed that he took down this giant of a soldier, full of armor, with just, in quotes, a stone and a sling. So we see a story here that David adapted, he improvised, and he overcame. He did more with less. In fact, a lot less, didn't he? So Saul didn't see any other way to victory that could be won, because it could not have happened in Saul's eyes without armor. Saul thought that if Goliath had armor, Saul must meet him on equal terms, meaning armor to armor. That doesn't always work that way. So when you and I think outside the box, then certain things happen that could be very, very good for all of us. Alexander Graham Bell said one time, so when one door closes, another door opens, listen, but we so often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see the ones open for us. How many times have you and I fallen into this attitude that we grieve, listen, we grieve over the closed door. We're so focused on that closed door that we're crying and wailing because the door is closed when several other doors are unlocked. They might not be open, but maybe they're ajar. Maybe there's an invitation that only is going to take a little bit of effort for you to open that door even more, to walk through, to experience opportunities that didn't even exist, really, with those doors that have been closed in your life. Winston Churchill also said, during their lifetimes, every person will stumble across a great opportunity. Sadly, he says, most of them will simply pick themselves up, dust themselves down, and carry on as if nothing has ever happened. So you and I have the choice to either push through the difficulty and the discouragement and the temptation to look at yesterday, or to keep moving ahead and looking for new and bigger opportunities. Dale Wilson shares that there's recommendations for making plans based on the things that you've been able to experience in the past. How about we're tempted sometimes that we set tasks according to our current capabilities instead of what your capabilities could be molded into. Oftentimes we put ourselves in such a box, I'll use that term again, into a box, that we think that our potential is only going to be based on what we have been able to do in the past. Is the point I'm trying to make. When if you put yourself in that fire, if you put yourself into as the Old Testament says, the potter's hand, that can form you and shape you in a way that you can't even comprehend right now, but you're trusting God every day to take you down certain steps. You're opening doors, you're knocking on doors, you're doing all those things you should do, like Peter and John did. He not only prayed, but he did what? He took him by the hand and lifted up the guy. So the author says maybe you shouldn't let those short-term disappointments blur the potential future of things that you're trying to accomplish. Because oftentimes those strikeouts can be really discouraging, as I shared earlier. The strikeouts can be discouraging, meaning that if those strikeouts continue, you think you're never going to hit the ball again, much less a home run. Your vision or the commander's intent should never change, but your plans must change. And I shared that a bit in the last couple of weeks here. He says that change is the only thing that remains the same throughout an organization. That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it, right? Change is the only thing that remains the same throughout an organization. Stuff that worked 30, 50, 100, 3,000 years ago doesn't necessarily work today. Some of it might, but not all of it. He says you might miss your target, but as long as you've adjusted and improved your tactics based on the improvise, adapt, and overcome concept, you're making progress. How many young people do you know who don't learn the same way that you learn? So to try to get some people to learn the same way you learn is, at least in my own humble opinion, is a form of arrogance, isn't it? Because not all of us learn the same way. So in other words, for us to be flexible with other people, then we need to be flexible with ourselves, I think, oftentimes. To however you get it done, however you reach from A to B, if you need to go here before you get to B, then that's the way it needs to be. We need to be flexible. We need to be able to improvise in the path that we're trying to accomplish. And it's hard to stay motivated in that process because, like me, like I shared earlier, I hate detours. I hate distractions. I hate getting stuff in the way. But that's part of life, isn't it? There are times when you have to be willing to be taken by the hand. Listen, to see another angle, just to see another angle to give you a new point of view that impacts your entire battle. I'll end with a story. One spring day, an old lady went out to the garage and dug the old rototiller out from under a rusty tub that covered the engine. Seems like the old lady had found a big bag of seeds that was a vine that would bear bright red flowers. The old lady loved bright red things. She made a decision. She said she got out of the swing and to grow her beautiful flowers of joy. With great excitement, she pulled real hard on the rope, and with great effort, she was finally to get that old rototiller to run. There was a wall of concrete blocks between her and the neighbor's driveway. The blocks were laid, a block and a space or a gap, then another block and a space, all the way down the driveway, all the way to the garage. With great effort, the old lady plowed between the driveway and the wall, and she blistered her hands and her back hurt, but the jarring rototiller finished the task. With feelings of accomplishment and pride, she got down on her knees and planted all the seeds in several rows along the wall. The rains came. The Lord blessed the little seeds, and the sunshine warmed the ground. One day, the little old lady saw the heads of the plant break forth, and the vines grew and grew until the vines completely covered the wall. The vines so grew that the wall could not be seen. She would sit daily in the swing and watch the progress of the vine. This was great joy to the old lady. Beautiful vines, but no flowers. Nada, nothing. Where are all my beautiful red flowers? One day, after much disappointment and great thought, the lady decided, I planted those vines for flowers, bright red flowers, and there are none. I'm going to cut those dumb, empty vines down and burn them. She went down to the driveway, into the garage, and got the rusty old hoe, sharpened the edge, and started chopping the vines down. About the third vine was chopped down, and she grinned ear to ear. The neighbor, pulling into his driveway, skidded to a halt and jumped out of his car and ran over to her. He said, "What on earth are you doing? I know this is your property and that is your vine, and you can do as you choose, but why are you cutting down this vine?" The old lady explained to the kind neighbor, "I planted this not for the vine, but for the red flowers, and there are none. After all my sweat and blisters and watering, not one flower. I'm cutting this down because there are no red flowers, and that is why I planted them." Without one word, listen, the neighbor took the feeble lady by the hand and led her to the other side of the wall. And on his side of the fence, there were over 1 million of the brightest red flowers you ever saw. Between every block there was a brilliant blossom. The story, I'll end with a story saying that landing on your feet happens on purpose. And sometimes in the middle of your journey, you can't see the bright red flowers until somebody takes you by the hand and leads you to a place that you have not considered before in order to see the bright red flowers that are blossoming and have been blossoming for a long time in other people's lives. So if you adapt, if you improvise, if you overcome and do more with less, that's key to landing on your feet.